As I was listening to Senator Buttimer, the thought came to my head, oh my God, not another citizens' assembly. Because it seems to me that the government reaches for citizens' assemblies every time it doesn't have the answer to complex problems, or every time it wants to hide behind people instead of taking responsibility for the fact that this is the Citizens' Assembly first and foremost. I'm all in favour of citizens' assemblies to consult, to take the temperature of public opinion, and that's all well and good. But we've got to stop talking about. Less talk about citizens' assemblies, I think, and more talk about how we can be a more effective Oireachtas, testing government policy, getting a genuine hearing for amendments when we propose them, and so on, instead of the rubber stamping exercise that very often is going on in this place. The other thing I was struck by as I was listening to Senator Buttimer was the narrative to praise and then to say, but this is the best country in the world. Now that's a phrase I associate with politicians on the other side of the Atlantic. I tend to take a view that we have a slightly more sophisticated view, mostly in Europe, and we tend to realise, if we're thinking and reflective people, that in some ways this country is great and in some ways this country is terrible. And that is the truth of the matter. And, let's have none of this Harold Macmillan, you've never had it so good, playing to the gallery, you've got free contraception, you've got this, that and the other. That is not the test of welfare. Of our country. We live in a country, despite all the progress that people can point to in many different areas, which is granted, which has gone backwards in lots of ways as well. And until we have politicians that are ready to talk about that and fess up to it openly, we are not going to be doing a service to the young people whom we want to address in galleries. This country is an extremely violent place for some, more violent than it ever was before. There are people caught up in drug addiction, in multi-generational education disadvantage to an extent that did not happen in the past. This country has disimproved in many ways, while it has also improved in many ways. So let's be honest. There's a lot of misery and suffering in our country. There are lots of people who face tremendous challenges in their lives. And you can say, Senator Buttimer referenced mental health. Well, how much was there for people with disabilities and mental health challenges in the budget? I had a conversation with the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform on my way into this room, and he rightly pointed out to me, isn't it good that we were able to pay for all of this without borrowing? And that's true, and he rightly pointed to the situation of our friends in Britain and the challenge that they're facing right now, But the other side of it is, and I observed to him, I can remember when there was a big giveaway budget under Charlie McCreevy, but there was a hell of a different mood in the country. There is not a celebratory mood in the country. People are worried about what is coming around the corner. Of course you can. Always give away.
You said that the test was not what Senator Buttimer outlined as being the test for welfare. What is the test, Senator, and how do you assess it?
The test is to have a human dignity approach to policy and legislation across the board. The test is to pay attention always to the most vulnerable in our society. There's a protest taking place on the Quad in my old alma mater, now renamed the University of Galway, at 6 p.m. this evening. And I want to commend those who are keeping the real issues on the agenda. It's not going to be possible to provide GP care for 400,000 additional people. And people earning between 20 and 30,000 don't, in my view, stand to benefit very much from the budget announcements that we've heard in recent days. But what I wanted to address today, in particular, being a member of the Education Committee myself, is the student accommodation crisis. I spoke to a university president here in Dublin last week, and he made the point to me that unless there is a subvention from the state for student accommodation to be established by the university, they will have to charge €14,000 a year to students to get a return on their investment if they provide student accommodation. We do the math and divide that by the number of months in an academic year. What's that? €1,400? €1,500? How can people afford that? So I think the current generation need an awful lot more than platitudes. We have to acknowledge that the emerging generation face challenges that their parents, and indeed the people of my generation were halfway between, the mezzanine generation, if you like, did not did not face. So I think it is time for us to reflect on the nature of our political system and the seeming inability of the government machine to deal with problems that it should be able to see coming down the tracks. Since March of this year, it was obvious that there was likely to be a major issue with student accommodation this autumn. And yet it does seem that the government is being caught flat-footed on this and other problems. And we have heard the horror stories. I think it was the editor of the University Times in TCD, Alvin Noonan, who brought to us an interview with a student who was living out of a van due to the unaffordability of student accommodation. Now, I do realise that it's easy for me to get up here and point to the problems. I only do so because it is our job to continue to reflect on the inadequacies in our system and how they are affecting people. Because issues like accommodation, issues like the practical realities, access to good quality health care, those issues are connected with mental health. Those issues are connected with the question of the resilience of our country and of its people now into the future. So I would appeal for a sense of urgency. Yes, there are things to celebrate about advances in this country, but there's a hell of a lot to regret as well, and there's a hell of a lot of problems that we seem very reluctant to talk about seriously in these houses sometimes. Thank you.